Have you ever heard somebody speaking English as a second language and just been blown away by how effortlessly they communicate? And yet, there are people that have been in the country 10 times as long that still freeze up in every conversation. So, what's the difference? You could chalk it up to talent, but you'd be missing out on discovering one of language learning's best kept secrets. One of the biggest reasons why some people seem to pick up a new language in a fraction of the time it takes everybody else. And it has nothing to do with talent, apps, or how many hours they study. It comes down to the type of content you're practicing with, and specifically, the kind that school and most big language programs have been feeding you your whole life. So, what do I mean by authentic content? There are a few components, but what it ultimately boils down to is, does it sound like the language native speakers use on a daily basis? In practice, this usually means listening to a native speaker speaking naturally, not reading off a script, not going out of their way to be perfectly proper, just a real person talking the way they actually talk, using slang, changing their tone, talking fast, using filler words, and even pronouncing words differently than they're technically supposed to be. I recognize that this is a little hard to envision, especially if this is your first time hearing of authentic content. So here's an example in English. Take a look at the table on the right. You'll see a few different examples of how the correct way to say things can stray pretty far from how they're actually said in everyday conversation. Whether it's blending sounds or dropping them entirely, or softening sounds so that we're able to speak faster, things like better instead of better, or to instead of to, I'm going to the store, or even completely changing words from how they're spelled. 'Cause I said so. I'll probably see you there. Let me know. Those expensive language courses are going to teach you the correct language. They have to for the money they're charging. I don't know, not I don't know. You and I, not you and I. I'll probably be there. You get the point. And you need to know the correct language. But the problem with only being exposed to that is you'll be totally lost when you visit the country and hear the everyday pronunciation. After all, you've never heard it before. It's not what you're good at because it's not what you practice. But that's the language that actually exists in the real world, and that's what your ear needs to get trained on. So, what kind of content should you be using? There are primarily two specific things you'll want to look out for. The first is content by native speakers, or at least someone with a very high level in the language. Here's why. The language you're able to recognize and one day will produce yourself is going to strongly mirror what you're listening to. So if it's someone who speaks the language with a thick accent, that's going to sound pretty different from what you'd hear from a native speaker. And again, those inconsistencies will slow you down when you need it in real life. You want to avoid a situation where you're picking up patterns and accent or other quirks that are specific to the speaker you're listening to rather than the language itself. The second is natural, free-flowing dialogue. If it feels stiff, scripted, robotic, however you want to call it, that should raise a red flag. We'll get into this a little more in a minute, but if it's completely unlike how anyone actually speaks, there's a very low ceiling on how useful it'll be for you. Real conversations don't sound like that. People don't speak in complete sentences. They trail off, they use fillers, like. They skip words, they talk over each other, they use contractions and slang and shorthand that never appears in a textbook. If your practice doesn't reflect any of that, you're training for a version of the language that doesn't exist outside of the classroom. And the gap between what you've been practicing and what you actually encounter, that's exactly where comprehension breaks down. Now, I want to show you something because this difference is one of those things that can feel abstract, but once you hear it, there's no going back. That being said, it can be a little hard to pinpoint if you don't know the language. So we're going to listen to two short clips, both teaching English. And just pay attention to how each one sounds and ask yourself, which one of these do you think would better prepare a student for a real conversation?
Hello.
Hello,
How are you?
I am fine. Thanks. What about you?
thought we could talk about it. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you guys.
Yeah, so first, let's do a little introduction. What do you do with Speak English with Vanessa?
Yes.
The difference should have been obvious. Exhibit A is polite, structured, correct, and completely robotic. Even if a student mastered understanding that style of English, I'd fully expect them to still be lost in a real conversation. And if they tried to speak and it mirrored what was in that video, they likely wouldn't impress many people. On the other hand, in Exhibit B, the speakers are making an effort to be clear, definitely slowing down slightly, but the way they express themselves is natural. The rhythm is right, the vocabulary is real. A student practicing with that material is building an ear for actual conversational English, not a textbook version of it. Same subject, same goal, completely different result. And here's another level to it. If you had to listen to one of those for 30 minutes, which one would you actually choose? The answer is obvious, and that matters too, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with this content. You need to enjoy it. So, where do you find authentic content? Especially if you're a beginner and most native speaker content feels out of reach. The good news is we live in a time with YouTube and the internet that has never existed before in the history of language learning. There are native speakers of almost every language creating content on the internet for learners at just about every level, on every topic imaginable. The type of authentic content that older generations would have had to travel across the world to experience is now sitting in your pocket. A simple Google search for native Italian speakers on YouTube will give you a starting list. You could add in your level to get more specific, beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever it may be. Easy Languages is also a great resource that I've leaned on heavily over the years. They have real conversations with native speakers, structured for learners. A lot of the times they have playlists broken out by level too, and as your level improves, you could start moving into content made purely for native speakers. And at that point, you're as authentic as it gets. The key is always the same. Does it sound like how people actually talk? If yes, that's authentic input. That's what your ear needs. You get good at what you practice, so practice with the real thing. Subscribe and stick around. Step by step, at your own pace, no textbooks, no stress.